All right, well, I want to start today by sharing a little known fact about myself. It's not necessarily one that I want to admit to any of you, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. I am not very good with directions. I'm just not. I will try to get to the destination, but I will typically get there late because I've taken at least 4 or 5 wrong turns. Now, there is an exception. There's an exception. The exception is if I'm driving with my wife. My wife and I, we've got a good system. She navigates, I drive. I don't get anxious when it comes to traffic and other situations, but she just tells me and she just points and I move and I go and it works out really, really well. The problem comes when she is not in the car to navigate with me, and I know some of you are like, dude, get a GPS. That's where we're at, the 21st century. Here's the thing, my phone lags GPS so badly that it is absolutely useless. This is how bad it is. I am still the guy who goes onto Google Maps and prints out directions to a location. And so because we live in Kentucky, I will look at those maps and it will have a street name, but there is no street name posted. It's like a number, and I drive right on by, and it's like, oh my goodness, where am I? So again, this is how bad it can get. A few weeks ago, I was leaving for a location that I've never been. It was about 30 minutes away, and so I'm hugging my wife goodbye, saying, oh, I'll see you in a few hours. And she gives me a hug. She says, I love you, and then she whispers in my ear, I guess I'll hear from you in about 15 minutes when you're lost. It's like, oh, come on. But it's absolutely true because it's happened so many times. I will be halfway in the drive, I'm like, honey, I don't know where I'm at. I think I made a wrong turn. I'm just not very good at getting to those destinations. How many of you can just make me feel good for just a little moment? How many of you also, you struggle a little bit? Okay, there's a few of you. Now, let's go to the other side. How many of you always get to the destination, no problems at all, and you are kind of judging the rest of us who just raised your hand because you're like, what's wrong with you guys? Any of you? Any of you? Okay, there's a few. There's a few. So we're going to play a game for you judgy Judies out there, and it's called Do You Really Know Your Directions? Okay, so anyone can play, but particularly those who think they're really good with directions. Let's imagine that we want to go to Lexington today, and so you make a left out of our parking lot, and you get onto the Bluegrass Parkway, heading to Lexington. What direction are you going? Is it north, south, east, or west? East, very good. Okay, you guys are good. Let's imagine that maybe this afternoon you decide, you know what, let's have lunch in Frankfurt. And so you make a right out of our parking lot and you start heading to Frankfurt. What direction are you now heading? North. You guys are on money here. Okay, so let's go ahead and say that about 8 minutes into that drive, you decide, no, I would rather go and visit Louisville this weekend. And so you get onto 151. What direction are you now heading? Trick question. So 151 still takes you north until you hit 65, which then allows you to go west. So 64, yes, sorry, 64. See what I told you? So with the exception of Tucker, the rest of you guys are just as helpless as I am. I'll give you one more. Let's just do one more. What direction are we heading if I point this direction? What direction is this? You guys, anyone know? You guys want to know the real answer? I have no idea because I'm not good with directions. Any one of those answers might have been right. So what do we know? We know that if you take certain roads, if you take certain highways, if you take certain paths, you're going to wind up at a destination, right? That's why roads, highways, streets exist. And if you wanted to head to Cincinnati today, get onto 75 going north, and it's pretty much a straight shot. If you want to spend the weekend in Nashville, again, you hop onto what? Tucker. Oh man, that's the 65. That's the 65 one. South, and you'll run in Nashville, and you'll be jamming to your country music in no time, right? Let's go ahead and say you're like, I don't like going south though. I like to travel north. Are you going to hit Nashville? No. What city will you hit instead? You will actually hit, what? Indianapolis. And you won't be jamming to country music, you'll be jamming to the Dave Matthews Band. That's probably, and you'll be rooting for, I think, a subpar team, but the Colts are trying, so, we'll just give them a little bit of break this year. But what do we know? We know that every single road, every single street, every single highway, every single path is taking you to a destination. And I know I'm not blowing any of your minds right now, but the truth is that this is a principle that makes a lot of sense when it comes to maps. It makes a lot of sense when it comes to GPS and hopping on a highway, but it's also a principle that you can actually apply to almost every other area of your life. Let's walk us through some examples of this. Let's go to the next slide. Do you guys realize that every single destination, every single path that you take, there are specific or predictable financial paths that actually will take you to very predictable financial destinations? For example, if you live outside of your means, spending money that you do not have, that will take you to a very predictable path or very predictable destination. What's the destination? Well, it's probably you're going to be in debt and you will feel the bondage of that debt. If, on the other hand, you choose to take another path, and that's the path of living within your means, maybe saving money, actually finding some wise investments, well, you will probably experience financial freedom and you'll have some margin in your life. Let's go to the next slide. There are predictable relational paths with predictable relational destinations. If you decide that I'm going to mistreat my spouse, I am going to take my spouse for granted, there's a very predictable path that leads to. If you consistently show love to your spouse through words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, and all the other 5 love languages, there is a very predictable destination that you will arrive at. Let's go to the next one. There are predictable emotional paths with predictable destinations. Next one. You guys realize that there are predictable spiritual paths with predictable spiritual destinations. We've all experienced this. I mean, every single one of us has experienced this on some level. I just think about your dietary habits. There are certain dietary paths that will lead you to either being overweight and unhealthy, or dietary paths that you can take that will actually keep you healthy and living much longer. We know this. It's funny, whenever I go to the doctors, or any healthcare provider, even dentists, what do? When you first have an appointment, you have a piece of paper and there's a list of questions that you have to answer about yourself. And there are always a certain number of questions that not only get asked on the paper, but also when you go and you sit in with the dentist or you sit in with the doctor or whatever the healthcare professional is. You know what those questions typically are? They always ask me, Jonathan, do you smoke? Do you drink? Now, why do they always ask me that? Well, I always answer, no, I don't. And then I'm almost always given a, well, good. Now, why are they saying, oh, good? Because every single day they deal with men and women who took a different path. And they usually are in their hospital, in their doctor's office, because of the destination that they have now arrived because of the path that they chose maybe years, decades earlier. And now they're dealing with that consequence. So what do we know? We know that every single path, we know that every single road, every single street, whether it's actually a physical street, a physical highway, or paths that we take emotionally, spiritually, relationally, they will have destinations. And so this is 2023, right? We are 1 week into 2023. And a lot of us, as we think about the new year, what are we doing? We just naturally, as a society, as a culture, we look at the horizon of our life and we start to ask, are we actually arriving? Are we moving towards the destination that we really want? And if we're not, then we evaluate, well, what do we need to do differently this year? And because this is kind of a natural part of who we are as people, at least as Americans, one of the things that I want to do this month is to teach you a principle. A principle that if you leverage it to your advantage, this is a God-given biblical principle. If you leverage it to your advantage, you will actually be arriving at destinations that not only you desire, but your Heavenly Father desires for you. And if you ignore this principle, you will find yourself in disastrous destinations. So let's just kind of unpack this just for a moment, because I have, over the years, I have taught you, I've shared with you many biblical principles. And Before we actually explain this principle, I think it's important for us to understand what a principle actually even is. This is a word that we use. This is a word that even as a young man I had heard and I thought I understood, but really probably didn't understand what a principle was until reading one of Stephen Covey's books. And it was like, oh, that's what a principle is. So let me first take us on a journey of explaining what a principle is and what a principle is not. If you don't mind going to the next slide. What is a principle? Well, first of all, it is not a rule or a law you follow. Principles actually follow you. So we know that when it comes to certain behaviors, we know that if, for example, you got a formula, do A, B, and C, well, you can arrive here. That's not necessarily what a formula is, or excuse me, that's not necessarily what a principle is. A principle is going to apply itself to your life whether you're doing A, B, C, or not. And we'll explain that a little bit more, but let's go to the next one. A principle is not something that you choose to apply. It applies itself to you. It just kind of sticks to you. It's like freshly chewed gum that you step in. It's like, whether you want it there or not, it's going to be applying itself to your life. Next one. A principle is not something that you can break. Like you can break rules. You can break your word. You can break laws, but you can't break a principle. It's going to apply itself to your life whether you like it or not. However, if you ignore the principle, it does have the potential to actually break you. Maybe one way to think about a principle, how many of you, maybe you studied it, how many of you at least have heard of Archimedes' principle? You guys remember hearing that at some point in school, like Archimedes' principle? Okay, so this is a principle that applies itself to your life whether you want it to or not. It applies itself to your life when you're swimming. It applies itself to your life when you hop on your bass boat and you go fishing for the weekend out in the lake. It applies itself to your life when you decide this summer we're going to go on a cruise ship to the Bahamas. It's just going to apply itself to your life whether you like it or not. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I don't really care for that. I don't want some outside force applying itself to my life if I don't feel like it. So, you know what? I don't even like the name Archimedes, so phooey. Well, you can say phooey all you want. And you can ignore his principle, and it might actually lead to your peril. So let's talk about what exactly Archimedes' principle is. It says that a body immersed in liquid receives an upward thrust from the bottom towards the top, equal to the weight of the displaced liquid. Now, does anyone want to just kind of fall asleep now that you know this principle? Yeah, pretty much. They're boring. Principles are kind of like that. But that doesn't mean they're not life-changing. When it comes to this principle, really what it's saying is if you throw a pebble into the water, it's going to sink. But miraculously, guess what? A 55-ton battleship has the potential of floating. Now, you can ignore that principle, or you can leverage that principle. You can leverage it to your advantage, or you can ignore it to your own peril. So what is the principle that we're going to be talking about? This God-given principle that if we apply it, leverage it in a positive way to our life can actually lead to those destinations actually being arrived at some point in our lives. Destinations that we desire and God desires for our lives. Well, what I want to do today is introduce you at least to the name, what we're going to call this principle. And then what I want to do is see how Jesus explains this principle. And then if you haven't kind of figured out what the principle is, I'll define it very specifically at the end of the message. Now understand, I have not created this principle, just like Archimedes did not create his principle of buoyancy. Now he discovered it. He in the 3rd century, through a lot of mathematics that I don't understand, like he was able to explain it to people. And what I want to do with this principle is I want to repackage biblical ideas and themes in a way that hopefully by the end of the message you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. I get it. And this is how I can leverage it to my life. So what is this principle? This principle we're calling the principle of the path. The principle of the path. Now some of you are thinking, Jonathan, that's pretty clever. Pastor, I hear the alliteration there, like PP, principle of the path. I can't even take credit. I did not actually invent the name. I stole this from a book, actually. But what I'm going to do is I'm still going to try to repackage this. And what I want to do is explain how I oftentimes first explain the principle of the path to people. As a pastor, people will come to me and they're in some sort of crisis. Oftentimes they'll come to me, they've got a problem, and they never say it quite in these words, but they'll say, Jonathan, can you fix this? Can you help me fix this? Now, what is this? It could be anything from a broken marriage. It could be a child who's just crazy. It could be a financial decision that they found themselves in. It could be a issue at work, but they say, Jonathan, can you fix this? And what do I do as a caring pastor? I listen and I ask questions. And at some point, after listening enough and asking enough questions, I will say something that drives people crazy. In fact, I'm going to tell you what I tell them, and some of you are going to yeah, no, he does do that, because you've heard me actually say it to you. And some of you are going to yeah, no, my spouse, we went in, and that's exactly, yeah, it's super annoying. So here's what I say. At some point, after listening, after asking enough questions, I will say these words, or something like it. I'm really sorry that you're dealing with this. I wish that there was a silver bullet that we could take aim at this problem, pull the trigger, and eliminate it from your life. I wish that there was some sort of magic potion that we could just kind of, spread all over this situation, and then tomorrow it would be done and out of your life. But that potion doesn't exist. And then what I say next really, really is frustrating. What I explain is, okay, here you have this problem. And again, not every time am I dealing with someone in crisis and I have this conversation, but I would say a good solid 75% of the time. You're in this crisis. You've arrived at an undesired destination, but you have been taking steps towards this undesired destination for years, for months, for weeks, maybe just for days. But you've been taking steps in this direction for quite some time. And if you want this to be solved, you're actually going to have to change directions, and you're going to have to take just as many steps, if not more steps, to arrive at your desired destination. So frustrating, right? Super annoying. Some of you are like, I am never going to go to that guy for advice ever. Because what do we want? We want the quick fix. What do we want? We want, Jonathan to come up with some brilliant idea that by tomorrow the problem has been alleviated. But that just doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. One of the things that you can do, though, is you can leverage the principle of the path. You can leverage this principle of the path that will allow you to heal broken relationships, or better yet, keep you from breaking relationships in the first place. You can leverage this principle of the path financially. You can leverage the principle of the path when it comes to your morality. You can leverage the principle of the path when it comes to your school friends and the issues that are taking place in your city. You can leverage this principle. Just going back to the finances. My wife and I, we have been leveraging the principle of the path in our finances since before we were married. And we have never actually had debt outside of our mortgage payments. We've never had a single amount of debt, even student loan debt, since even before we were married. And some of you, and get this, we have never once argued about finances, money, ever. Never. And I know some of you are like, well, Jonathan, you guys are what, in your early 20s? Okay, so maybe you see through that one. But here's the thing. Next month, we will be married 20 years, not one argument. Why? Because I think we have leveraged this principle of the path. So again, you might be thinking, well, what is this principle? Because that sure sounds like a magic potion. And you just said that magic potion doesn't exist. You're right. If it was a formula of A, B, C, and D, I'm probably overselling the principle of the path. But it's not. It's a principle, and you can either apply it just like Archimedes' principle of buoyancy, and you can float, or you can ignore it, and you can find yourself drowning. The choice is up to you. So Jesus is going to unpack what this principle is. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 7. If you're a student of Scripture, you know that this is one of, towards the end of Jesus' probably most famous sermons that we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the things that he's going to do right here at the end is he's going to end with a parable. And this parable, I think, really sets the stage for what this principle of the path is. Some of you have read it. Some of you have studied it. Some of you, if you were brought up in the church, you actually might be able to sing this principle. Fortunately for you, or this parable that he's going to share. Fortunately for you, I am not going to sing this parable to you, but Tony T-Day, you might want to talk to Tony T-Day. He can sing it for you. He's probably doing it with your kids right now if you've got kids in preschool. All right, how does it begin? Verse 24 says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. Let's pause there for a moment because I don't want you to miss how important this is. We see Jesus ending his sermon. And how does he end it? He ends it with an invitation. Now, I know a lot of you guys, I'm going to go ahead and say 100% of you guys are going to sign up for life groups today because that's going to be a priority in your life. And I know this is 2023, right? You are going to be at church every single Sunday, right? That's what you're going to do because you know it's a priority. And when you're a part of a church community, I've noticed that some of you like to be shoved around a little bit. I've had conversations with you. You'll use different language. You'll say things like, yeah, I know, I like it when the pastor steps on my toes a little bit. You just like to be shoved. You like to be pushed a little bit. You like to be challenged a little bit. In fact, some people leave, and if they don't hear a little bit of fire and brimstone, they're like, that's not a real church, right? There's just this sense of, I like to be shoved. I like to be pushed. Some of you like to cry. Like a good sermon, you know, if you leave, and I have ended the sermon with some sort of compelling, challenging, really heart-touching, and there's a tear, and you have to do one of these things. You're like, oh, such a beautiful service. It was beautiful. Like, if there's no tears, it's like, I don't even know why I woke up today, right? You love to be pushed around. You love to cry. And Jesus, notice, he does not end his sermon this way. Now, if he was here, he might say, well, just ask Jonathan to take you out to his car, and he has a tire iron, so if you want to leave crying and pushed around, he'll just kind of, no, he wouldn't say that, and I wouldn't do that. So how does he actually end his sermon? He begins this way, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. What is his calling? What is his invitation? His invitation is, I want you to do the things that I've told you to do. Can you just do that? Can you be obedient to the things that I've called you to be obedient to? And you might say, why? Why is that so important? Well, he explains it in the next verse. What does he say in the next verse? Well, because you'll experience immediate relief, relationally, financially, along with a few other alleviations. I made that up. If you're not paying attention, that is a made-up verse, and that is not what he is promising. What does he actually say? He says, well, listen to me because it will actually help fix all of your problems. No, Jesus is not offering fairy dust. You know what he is offering, though? He's offering a change of direction. What happens when we change direction? We actually begin to follow him. We become like a wise man, he says. We become someone of wisdom. And we've talked enough in our church about wisdom to kind of know what this is. But just in case you don't, biblical wisdom is understanding God's truth, and then living that truth out. Wisdom is an individual who understands that all of life is actually interconnected. And what you did yesterday is actually impacting you today. Wise people understand that what you do and don't do today is going to impact tomorrow. It says, if you follow, you are like a wise man who built. You ever build something? I am not the best builder. Just like I am not very good with directions, I'm not very good with building. But when I see someone who is, I marvel. And I marvel because there's a discipline to a good builder. They'll measure once, and then they'll measure twice, and then they'll measure that same thing 3 times. Why? Because it needs to be just right so that you can ride on it without it breaking, so that you can live in it without it collapsing around you. This is doing life with discipline, with rhythms and habits that are actually moving you to where you want to be tomorrow. It's like a wise man who built. What are we building here, though? Who built his house. Now, this is a metaphor. If you've ever read through this parable, this is a metaphor for life. What are we building? We're building a life. This is your hobbies. This is your interests. This is your relationships. You're building something. And how are we to be building this? If we're following Jesus, we're building on the rock. It's not taking the easy way. It's not taking the shortcuts. It's doing the difficult things to lay that foundation so that there is a strong, secure life. Now, In this parable, we've been introduced to the wise man, but there's someone else that we're also introduced to in verse 26. It says, "But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man." We've talked about people who were foolish, and really if we're just kind of comparing and contrasting the wise individual to the foolish individual, I think you kind of understand the foolish individual does not realize that what they do today or not do today, they don't realize how it's going to impact them tomorrow. In fact, they're so foolish that they may even make statements like, "Oh, no, I can get away with that. It's not a big deal. It's not going to be a problem. It's not really going to make any sort of negative impact in my life." And some people who are still foolish, they're so foolish that they actually think, well, you know what? Even if something does happen, even if something negative does occur, even if I arrive at an undesired destination, you know what? It's okay because my life is an electronic device. My life is an electronic device. You guys know what you do with electronic devices when they start acting weird? Like when your phone starts acting weird, you know what you do with it? You just power it down, right? You just hold a couple of buttons, you hold it for like 30 seconds, things completely shut off, and then what do? You wait a minute. Some of you are like, a minute? I wait like 10 seconds, maybe. And then like, you know, push start. And then hopefully everything's good to go. And most of the time, everything is good to go. And so people are like, you know what? No, it's okay. I'm just an electronic device. I can go ahead and move in with them. And if it doesn't work out, let's power down, unplug, and I'll move in with someone else. And it'll work out better this time. You know what? I can go ahead and get involved with those friends. I can actually marry her. I can marry him. And if the marriage doesn't work out, well, I'll just get a divorce and I'll marry somebody else. You know, financially, I'll just spend my money and then I'll spend money I don't have, and it'll be okay because, well, you know, I'll just power down and I'll declare bankruptcy and it'll be all good to go, right? You know, if it doesn't work out in that school, if it doesn't work out in that job, if it doesn't work out here, I'll just find some other church. But what do we see from foolish people over and over again? Foolish people, when they unplug and plug in somewhere else, they just continue to bring that same foolishness to the new space, in the new relationship, and it continues to lead to the same undesired destinations. I think the only time that we actually see this actually working is if, in the unplugging part, you actually plug into Christ, start following Him, and you actually arrive at a different destination because He is taking you somewhere healthy. What ends up happening with this unwise individual? Well, he's building, and he's building on what? He's building on sand. Now, let's just give you a quick modern-day example of building on sand. I think we all realize that in the first century, those who were hearing Jesus are probably like, oh, that's not going to end well. But why? Why? Well, we have a modern-day example of this. So in China, there are all kinds of building projects. I mean, talk about infrastructure. I mean, they're just going nuts with their infrastructure. But what we've seen over the last several decades is that there's projects that are referred to as tofu projects. Have you guys heard that before? So tofu projects are bridges and buildings that contractors, they take all these bribes, all this money that was supposed to go into getting the best building projects material possible, and they line their pockets with that money. I'll give you a quick 10-second video of an individual who is literally with his fingers ripping a pillar that has been newly built on a bridge in China. Let's watch.
I can rip this pillar off with my hands. I really doubt the quality of this bridge. They are cutting corners in everything.
How many of you want to commute on that bridge? I mean, that's crazy. Just ripping off a newly built pillar on this bridge. Some estimate as high as 37 bridges have had major issues in China just within the last 5 years. Like new bridges. Why? Tofu projects. Why? People are building on sand. What is that? It's an example of doing it the easy way. It's taking the shortcut in life. Where's that shortcut going to get you? That shortcut, that's going to end people's lives. Where does the shortcut get? The individual decides, you know what? I'm going to do things the easy way, not actually following Jesus. The rains came down. See, the foolish person thinks that the weather that they're experiencing today is going to be the weather they experience tomorrow. But it rarely is. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Let's just imagine for a moment that that individual survives. What is he going to do? Is he going to have a home tomorrow? Is it just going to be a quick, like, oh yeah, I'll do a quick rebuild. There won't be, no. I mean, this is, you got to demo what you've already done. It's a rebuild from ground level up. I mean, this is months in the making, maybe years in the making. See, this is what happens. This is what happens when you set the wrong direction for your life. What is the right direction? Well, we already know. It's following Jesus. So what happened? What happened to that individual? Verse 25. The rains came down for that individual. Notice that weather is still happening even to the follower of Jesus. The streams rose. Tragedy can still strike. And the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall. And the question you might ask is, well, why? Why didn't it fall? Why did it fall for the sand guy and not the rock guy? And the answer, again, is found in Scripture. It says, oh, because he was really, really lucky. Because everything always goes well for that family. Because no matter what they do, they just kind of bounce back and it never, no. That's how we oftentimes view our world, right? Someone else has arrived at a desired destination that we actually want and we go, they're so lucky. I wish I could have that. I know, everything I do, but everything works out fine for them. Again, if Jesus was here, I don't want to speak for him, so take whatever I say next with a grain of salt. But I think if he was here, he would say, guys, life is not like that. Instead, your Heavenly Father has actually created this world based on principles. Based on principles that if you actually leverage them to your advantage, He's giving you a certain element of control over your life to actually arrive at the destinations that you desire and He desires for your life. But you have to leverage them to your advantage. Some of you may, at this point, already really start to figure out what this principle of the path is. But just in case you haven't, what I want to do is I want to define it for you. And then I want to give you a quick challenge as we wrap things up. So I first want to just define, okay, what is the principle of the path? If you have a pencil or a pen, you're probably going to want to write this down. We'll be talking about it the rest of the month, but you want to write it down. If you're thinking about tattoo ideas this year, 2023, I'm going to get a tattoo right here on my forehead. This might be one that you might want to consider. Just write it backwards so you can read it in the mirror and not forget it. Here's the principle of the path. Direction determines destination. You guys hear it? Direction actually determines destination. Let me say it again. Direction determines destination. I know some of you are like, that is so boring. Yeah, not much better than Archimedes, is it? That's just how principles are. They're kind of boring, but they actually are life transforming. Can we say it together? On two. Let's say it together. 1, 2. Direction determines. Fantastic, fantastic. And I think when we understand this principle, it's like Jesus' invitation in the parable starts making way more sense, doesn't it? Again, going back, what is this invitation? What is this call? It's a one-word call, and it's not stop it. It's not a quick, like, hey, you need to knock it off. Ew, gross. Like, please don't do that anymore. No, that's not what his call is. That's not what his invitation is. One word. You guys remember what it is? Follow. Follow. Follow, because I am actually going to help you arrive at the desired destination. So follow me. So here's the challenge. Every single day this week, starting today, what I want you to do is just ask yourself a question. And you can ask this question throughout the day. Whenever you kind of sense you're not really sure, I think this is a perfect time to like, okay, the words that I just used, ask this question. Okay, wait, the hobbies I'm engaging in, ask this question. When you're maybe having some issues with relational, maybe your spouse or a friend, ask this question. What is the question? Here it is. What path am I on? What path am I on, and what destination am I heading? Like, what path am I on, and what's going to be the destination if I continue on this path? So you're having conversations with folk. Yeah, I just told that joke. If I continue to joke like that, okay, what path am I on, and what is going to be the destination? I just criticized that person. I just encouraged that person. Okay, what path am I on, and where is the destination going to lead me? Again, on your finances, you're spending some money. You're like, hey, what path am I on right now? And if I continue on this path, what's going to be the destination? Okay, I've got a little bit of time. I'm going to spend it either here or maybe I can spend it here. Okay, what path do I want to choose here? Because each is going to arrive at a destination. What destination do I want to arrive at? Like, what path am I on, and where is it actually going to take me? Just begin to ask yourself that question. That's it. We're not telling you to change directions. All we're doing is saying, evaluate. Because we're all going to end up somewhere, aren't we? Your kids are going to end up somewhere. You and your marriage are going to end up somewhere. When you decide to actually take Jesus' invitation seriously and actually begin to follow him, you're going to end up somewhere on purpose, though. And you will end up somewhere with a purpose. And when you're living a life of purpose, walking in step with Jesus, that is a very satisfying life. Is it without storms? No, of course not. But you will arrive at desired destinations. Let's not forget, direction determines destination. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that you are a God who has created this world. You know how it operates. You know how to best live it. And so, Father, thank you for revealing your principles to us. I ask that you would give us the wisdom to evaluate the paths that we are currently on, and that you would give us the heart to actually follow you in the direction that you are setting for our lives, so that we can all arrive at desired destinations. Father, I pray this all in your Son Jesus'